This is Garis, Masculist, MGTOW flyers. That is 2 3-page essays on the themes of Masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 254, entitled Feminals, Feminazi criminals. Description. This flyer lists the main crimes and transgressions committed by the hated Feminazi criminals, Feminals, against men, and how they can be eliminated. The flyer itself. Feminals, that's Feminals, Feminals, that is Feminazi criminals, by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. This flyer explains why Masculists have such a hatred of the Feminazi criminals, labelled for the rest of this flyer as Feminals for short. It begins with a bulleted list of the major crimes and transgressions committed by the Feminals, followed by details later. The flyer then discusses how the Feminals can be destroyed. Bullet. Feminals as genociders. Bullet. Feminal crimes in the divorce courts. Bullet. Feminal Cyanide Fairy PC bullshitters. Bullet. Feminal manslaving parasites. Bullet. Feminal hypocrisy. Bullet. Feminal arrogance. Bullet. Feminal misandry. Now the details. Bullet. Feminals as genociders. By far the most serious crime committed by the hated Feminals is that they have become genociders, wiping out whole populations due to their takeover of the divorce courts, making them so toxic for males that young men in many Western countries refuse to marry, refuse to have kids, and spend their money on themselves. This is not some fringy movement. It's some 2/3 of young men under 35, usually called the MGTOW, men going their own way. The MGTOW rejection of paternity is causing the birth rate to drop, and in time the population will fall. In Japan, for example, where the Japanese equivalent of the Western MGTOW movement is called the herbivores, has been around for a decade or so longer than in the West. Japan's population is now actually starting to fall. At its peak, it was 128 million. It's now 127 million and falling. Population projections predict that in 20 years, after the baby boomers have died, Japan's population will be about 80 million. That is about 2/3 of its current value. The Japanese birth rate is only 1.4 children per woman, with Italy, Spain, Germany, etc. having similar birth rates. The root cause of this catastrophically low birth rate is the toxicity of the divorce courts as created by the Feminals, resulting in young men making a cost-benefit decision that traditional marriage and paternity are such a rotten deal for men that 2/3 of them reject both, resulting in the above birth rates, and likely to get lower as nearly all young men refuse to marry and have kids. Thus, indirectly, the Feminals are genociders. Their takeover of the divorce courts is causing whole populations to be wiped out, so they have to be stopped. It's only a question of time before the broadcast media people become conscious of this phenomenon and start pointing the finger at the Feminals and accusing them of being genociders. Masculists and the more politically minded MGTOWs can certainly help in this process by educating the broadcast media of the population crash problem and the role played in generating it by the Feminals. Suggestions on how the Feminals can be stopped will follow after the discussion of the crimes and transgressions committed by the Feminals. Bullet. Feminal crimes in the divorce courts. There's currently a sex war going on in the divorce courts. They were taken over in the 70s by the feminists and made so favourable to women that men have been routinely financially massacred and have their lives ruined in their tens of millions in the US alone ever since. Typically, a divorcing father will lose his kids with a 90% probability. He will lose his house to his fluffy ex-wife. He'll lose half of his stuff. He'll pay child payments to his kids, whom he'll barely see, and often he'll pay alimony to his fluffy ex-wife, often for life. His life is ruined. About one married father in 4 is routinely financially massacred in this way, a far higher casualty rate than in a major war. It's not surprising that millions of men have a real hatred for the Feminals for doing this to them, and for the hated gender politicians who changed the divorce laws in the 70s to allow this to happen to hundreds of millions of men around the world. This massive injustice committed against men generates hatred and has resulted in practice in the rise of the MGTOW movement as young men under 35 see what has happened to their fathers, their uncles, their older male friends and want no part of it. So reject marriage, reject paternity and spend their money on themselves, going their own way, wanting nothing to do with female parasites who expect to be able to live off men's money. Bullet. Feminal is cyanate, fairy, PC, bullshitters. Masculists, that is men's lib scientists like myself, object strongly against the habit of the Feminals in making claims about women that are simply scientifically false. For example, the idea that women and men are equal in terms of abilities, or that anything a man can do, a woman can too. There's some truth to this, of course, given that the two performance level bell curves overlap considerably, but not at the top end of the performance scales at which men dominate. For example, the Feminals claim that women are as smart as men. No, they're not. Men have an average IQ that is 4 IQ points higher than women's. Men have a 10% higher IQ variance than women, which means that the morons and the genii are males. So it's not surprising that men have won 99% of the science Nobel Prizes. Men have much higher testosterone levels in their blood than women, so are more aggressive, more ambitious, more driven, more single-minded, more persistent, more dogged, so complete difficult, demanding tasks more readily than women. So it's not surprising that men utterly dominate the entries in the Who's Who books. There are hugely more great men than great women, which is almost an oxymoron. Too many Feminals are as cyanate fairies, that is, ignorant of science, unable to reason scientifically, living in a fairyland, believing what they want to believe, without evidence, just like religionists. Feminism is like a religion to a lot of women. It preaches to them what women desperately want to hear, that is, that women are as capable as men. But the above reality shows that it's not true. Masculine scientists like myself get really annoyed at hearing the cyanate bullshit coming from the Feminals. The cyanacy of the Feminals needs to be squashed. See below. Bullet. Feminal manslaving parasites. At age 16 in Western countries, about 3/4 of young women choose to study the soft option, that is, memory-based, intellectually easy, intellectually lazy subjects that will result in them being excluded from studying STEM, science, tech, engineering, math, and the professions at university, so that they end up with a fluffy crap diploma that the economy does not value. So that these fluffy crapper women are unable to earn a good salary, so that in their 30s, when their biological clock is ticking hard, they will look around for some gullible manslave to parasite upon, so that he pays for her to live in a middle-class house to raise her kids in. Under feminal influence, the average woman will have had some 40 different penises in her by the time she's in her 30s, statistics show. So that after a decade of marriage, she will get bored with her husband, that is, penis number 41, and drag him through the fluffy feminist-dominated divorce court system and financially massacre him, taking his kids, his house, and forcing him to pay child support and alimony. These career-incompetent females are labelled fluffies by the masculists and are treated with contempt. Masculists push men not to have relationships with fluffies, forcing fluffies to fip up, that is, become fips, financially independent persons, by getting a career-competent education so that they can become fips as adults and not parasite off a man's money, being a manslaver to some gullible, ignorant male who knows nothing about MGTOW nor masculism. Fluffies are the enemy of the masculists. The primary political goal of the masculists is to free men from manslavery by wiping out the fluffies, not by killing them, but by totally ignoring them, by not even pumping and dumping them, so that they rot on the shelf to extinction, utterly rejected by men. Such women will be manless, loveless, sexless, babyless, poor, and increasingly spat at by a society that is becoming increasingly sympathetic to the ideas of the MGTOWs and masculists. Masculists have a hatred of fluffies because fluffies are manslavers. They are immoral, parasitic, manslaving vermin to be wiped out by the masculists. Now that women have the contraceptive pill, they can reliably control the number of kids they want, which is typically 0, 1, 2, so that women have a career window of some 40 years. The masculists are saying that now women can work, they must work, because anything else is parasitism off the money of a man, and that is manslavery. It is exploitative. It is hateable. Bullet. Feminal hypocrisy. Most feminists are still fluffies, which makes them hypocrites in the eyes of the masculists, who label them contemptuously fluffy feminists. Masculists sneer at the hypocrisy of the feminals, who want their cake and to eat it too. They want equal rights with men, but reject equal obligations with men by not bothering to get a career-competent education at high school and college, so that they can become fips as adults and pull their financial weight and not expect to be able to parasite off the money of a man. Masculists have a hatred of fluffies, but an even greater hatred of fluffy feminists, because the fluffy feminists are not only fluffies, which is bad enough, but they're also hypocrites, because they reject equal obligations with men in sharing the burden of earning the living. Fluffy feminists expect to be able to parasite off the money of a man, just the way fluffies do. Look at the divorce courts to see fluffy feminism in action. The fact that the fluffy feminists, that is, feminal divorce court judges and lawyers, expect men to pay for ex-wives shows very clearly the fluffy feminist attitudes of these feminals. Bullet. Feminal arrogance. Young women in Western countries are now insufferably arrogant. They have been brainwashed by the feminals to think that they are superior to men in many ways and behave like young princesses, expecting men to kowtow to them if men want any chance of getting their penises into them. Masculists see this feminal arrogance as sheer essayant fairydom that needs to be shattered. See below on how this can be done. The level of intellectual dishonesty of modern feminism is so strong that rather poorly educated, not very bright young women lap it up because they are hearing what they want to hear, that is, that as women they are superior to men, that they can do anything that a man can do. It has gone to their heads. They are living in an essayant fairyland. Bullet. Feminal misandry. Now that women have entered the workforce in a big way, many women have gone into teaching and the media. They have been brainwashed with feminist ideas so that they are motivated to put men down, to see men as the enemy, so they portray men as evil, as the inferior sex. For example, on the broadcast media, men, for example fathers, are portrayed as bumbling, incompetent fools, whereas in fact the reverse is true, if you bother to inform yourselves of the scientific facts. Women have become decidedly misandrous lately, and men are fed up with it. The reality is the opposite of what the broadcast media portrays. Men are fed up with being dumped on by feminazi bitches, by feminals. How to wipe out the feminals? Question mark. The short answer to this question is by converting men into masculists, making men angry, by supplying men with the intellectual tools of masculist rhetoric, for example, the arguments above, so that men can hit back hard at feminal crimes and attitudes. The hatred expressed by men against feminals, against feminazi bitches, against fluffy feminist hypocrites is now so strong that young women don't dare state publicly in their social circles that they're feminists, because if they're stupid enough to do that, that will be the kiss of death for them in terms of getting a man. Because, quote, no man wants a relationship with a misandrist, man-dumping, feminazi bitch, end quote. Such women rot on the shelf, utterly rejected by men. Men need to be educated into masculist and MGTOW ideas so that they can lash back at feminal arrogance against feminal discrimination against men, especially in the divorce courts. Masculist ideas need to become as much a part of the general culture as are feminist ideas. Men need to be educated into masculist and MGTOW thinking so that they can defend themselves when confronted by feminals and harangue them out of the room with real masculist verbal intellectual venom, making it perfectly clear to these feminals that they are truly hated by men and will not get one. They will be punished by men by not having one. The zeitgeist needs to be changed so that the social pressure on women to be nice to men, to be fair to men, is so strong that those women who dump on men, who treat men badly, will get the same treatment from men and be punished. This is happening to an ever-growing extent as the male backlash against the feminals grows by the day. Young women now know this, so have become crypto-feminists, pretending to men that they are traditional women and appear to be nice to men. But in practice, these women know almost nothing about MGTOW nor masculist ideas, so by default have their heads filled with feminazi propaganda. They are as much Isianate fairies today as they were a decade ago. The masculists need to work hard on the broadcast media to teach the masses about masculist and MGTOW ideas so that women learn them too and can modify their attitudes. Otherwise, they'll be punished by men. The masculists and MGTOWs threaten women with manlessness and babylessness, which are powerful tools to force women to fip up, to become fips, and to pull their financial weight. Men's lib groups need to be set up in every high school and college to put moral pressure on fluffy students to become fips. Men's studies courses need to be set up at universities. Lots of books need to be written on masculist ideas, etc. The masculists and MGTOWs need to so change society that women lose their feminine attitudes or face the punishment of men. A fluffy can only be a fluffy if she can get her financial claws into some manslavable man, but MGTOWs and masculists are causing such men to disappear as men learn about MGTOW and masculist ideas and reject fluffies as manslaving parasites. In time, the society will be so imbued with masculist/MGTOW ideas that political pressure against the massive injustices against men in the divorce courts, the lack of a paternity rejection right, etc., will be men-fared. Women will become female masculists and vote with men to men-fare the gender laws. In the short term, men who have well absorbed masculist and MGTOW ideas need to harangue the feminazi bitches, giving them a clear message that they no longer have a monopoly on gender discourse. These feminals need to be taught that they have to share the gender stage with the MGTOWs and masculists and will be forced to adapt to them. Because when men become collectively angry at women, God help women! Exclamation mark. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. YouTube channels De Garis, Masculist, MGTOW, Flyers, and De Garis Essays. Ciao.